again, it's myself and Fiona. We're back with another hot topic that we just want to pick up, put some information together in a way that we think will be really useful to those of you who follow the podcast. When we do these hot topics, we really do just put them together pretty quickly. So, sometimes a bit rough and ready, and Fiona ends up having to do a bit of more editing than normal, perhaps. But we think they're worthwhile just to get information out and broaden out the perspective that you get from the usual media outlets. So
let's start with a little bit of background about what the two-child cap actually is, because we use that phrase a lot. We don't necessarily all know what we're talking about when we mention it. And we've got Osborne in that picture there because he was the one who brought it in as part of the Tory austerity.
Let's put up that then.
So this is the background from 2017. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, as part of his austerity drive, he decided that benefits being paid to large families were too costly, and that if they limited them, it meant that families in receipt of benefits have the same financial choices about having children as those people in work. I
didn't realise that was 2017. I mean, it's 7 years back. I hadn't quite kind of taken on board that it's been in place for such a long time.
And there's so much kind of unsaid in that quote, and it's got all sorts of assumptions about, what kind of families are on benefit, deserving poor and undeserving poor, and feckless single parents that the Tories always crusading about. And the idea that you would have children, never work, you're constantly on benefit, you just have more kids, you get more money. That's not what most people's lives are like. And benefits are there as a safety net for when things go wrong. And people start out in their lives, they have however many children they want to have. But things can change. People lose their jobs. Partners die, marriages break up. The idea that you can only have children if you're filthy rich and know you're never going to have any kind of catastrophe in your life. It's just Tory rhetoric nonsense, isn't it?
When it happened, I mean, it was picked up in certain parts of the UK media. It was picked up with the stuff about, folk who have one kid after another kid after another kid and, don't think twice about it. So whatever Osborne and them actually were thinking, that was the way it was picked up, and they knew that was going to happen.
So there's been a lot of pushback against it, obviously, over the years, because it has been driving families further and further into poverty. About 40% of universal credit recipients are in work. So again, it's not just about people, sitting at home having and breeding, as the Tories would have you believe. The way the two-child cap works is it applies to universal credit or child tax credits, which are being phased out as people transfer from that onto universal credit. Then you can't transfer back again. So gradually that will disappear. They will only pay the allowance for a child for the first two children. So however many you've got after that, you don't get paid for. And we all know about the rape clause. Go into a faceless government office and take complete strangers through possibly the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to you, then you might get an extra £287 a month.
I mean, I think there was a pretty big outcry about that all over the UK, but there was certainly a huge outcry about it amongst Scottish politicians, including Scottish politicians who were in Westminster at the time. I mean, Alison Thewlis was one of them. Who spoke a lot about that.
Yeah, and Labour, to be fair, Scottish Labour have until now always been, or seem to have been, against the two-child cap, and Sarwar has described it as heinous. Let's have a look at some of the things he's said. Calling on Keir Starmer to scrap the wrong two-child benefit cap.
So that was just 2 weeks ago.
That was 2 weeks ago, yeah. This was, I haven't got the date on here. It was when Starmer was up during the campaign, so just a few weeks ago. There's Sarwar saying he believes his party would be pushing at an open door for the abolition of the policy. Honestly believe that the government wants to do even more than it has promised to do, although as it turns out, even less than it promised to do is what's happening in reality. And then right before the election, the good old Daily Record came up with another vow from Brown: vote for ending child poverty. Right, so this is Stephen Flynn. This was his response to the King's speech.
So this was a debate about the King's speech. It happened in the Commons, right? Okay.
Yes.
The amendment which my colleagues and I, ably supported by other members from across the chamber, in relation to the two-child benefit cap. This is a policy, an iniquitous, heinous policy which was introduced by the former Conservative government in 2015. Each and every one of us in this chamber knows that it retains children in poverty. Hundreds of thousands of children across these isles. In Scotland alone, it impacts 27,000 households. It's estimated that 14,000 children would immediately be taken out of poverty were it to be scrapped. But it was not mentioned in the government's programme for government today. Instead, all we have heard is that a task force is going to be created. No time frame for that task force, no indication of when that task force will conclude, and all the while those children will remain in poverty. Surely it should be the bare minimum expectation of a Labour government to seek to do everything it possibly can immediately to lift children out of poverty. I'm particularly interested in the views of Scottish members of Parliament from the Labour Party in this regard. I would be delighted to give way.
Could he explain to the House why the SNP government in Scotland, who have the power to do so, have not?
I would be more than happy to enlighten the gentleman, the honourable gentleman, in that regard, because as he knows, in the UK we have reserved policies and we have devolved policies. Some 70% of welfare policies are reserved to this Parliament. Now, what the Scottish Government has sought to do over recent years is to mitigate the worst excesses of the Conservatives. Some £800 million worth of money that we could spend on other things, we choose to mitigate Tory policies, including, of course, the likes of the bedroom tax. And I'm sure the honourable gentleman opposite me would be very keen to see his own front bench mitigate and end that particular policy. But we do that within the confines of the financial remit set in large part by this place. And if the honourable gentleman is suggesting, as indeed I'm sure some of his Scottish colleagues would agree with, that the Scottish Government should mitigate this place, then he should outline, as they should, where that money should come from. Should it come from Scotland's NHS? Should it come from our schools? Should it come from our police? Should it come from our young people's budget? The reality is that the constraints placed upon Scotland by this place do not afford us the opportunity to mitigate. And quite frankly, I find it absurd and deeply disingenuous to suggest that the remit of Scotland's Parliament should be to mitigate Westminster. Our horizons should be so much greater than that. So I would return to the point that I was making. The Labour members in Scotland supposedly agree with the Scottish National Party that the two-child cap should and must be scrapped. So how will they vote? Will they follow the lead of their Prime Minister in London, or will they follow the lead of the leader in Scotland and indeed respect the views of the people that they were sent here to represent?
I thought that was quite a good clip because it covers quite a lot there. That intervention, this is something we're hearing a lot of from Labour about, well, why don't the Scottish Parliament do it? And although the Scottish Parliament do have the power to top up existing benefits, what they didn't say there was the Scottish Parliament actually is going quite a long way towards mitigating it, because Social Security Scotland provides a range of benefits for families, including, of course, the Scottish Child Payment. That works out at over £100 every 4 weeks for each child, no matter how many you've got, if you're on a qualifying benefit. The Best Start grant you get in pregnancy, and that is £754 payment for a first child. You get the baby box as well. So that's quite a significant help when you've got a new baby coming into the family. Best Start Grant Early Learning Payment, that's a £314 payment when a child is between 2 and 3. And even if they don't end up going to nursery, you can still get that payment. They get another £314 when they start school. So they should be starting school with the satchel and the little white shirt and the gym kit and everything they need to fit in and do well at school. And then the other one I hadn't heard of at all was Best Start Foods. So that's money every 4 weeks on a prepaid card from pregnancy until your child is 3 to pay for nutritious food for you and your child. Now, that is something that, you just don't hear anything about.
Yeah.
And that must go some way towards alleviating.
Yes, and I see at the bottom of that page that we've got up at the moment that they sort of say, if you're getting the Scottish Child Payment, which means you're eligible for that, that means you're on a low income family, then they'll check to see if you're eligible for these, Best Start Grant, Early Learning Payment, and School Age Payment. And just pay it automatically. So that's fantastic. I knew some of these, but I certainly didn't know them, all of them.
Yeah. So all this, though, Scotland could mitigate. We are doing what we can through the Social Security Scotland. And okay, it's not as much as people would get if they didn't have the 2-child cap as well. On there, just if anybody's interested, mygov.scot/family benefits. That's where you can find out more about that. Stephen mentioned there that they had proposed an amendment to the King's Speech, and the amendment was voted on. That's all the Labour MPs, including all the Scottish Labour MPs, who voted no to getting rid of the 2-child cap. So they voted to keep children in poverty. It just goes on and on.
When that vote was taken, so there was the people who voted for it, the MPs who voted for it, 7 Labour MPs, but also Plaid Cymru, the Greens, the Lib Dems, they all voted with the SNP to support their motion. I think actually the 4 Reform MPs, that's so Farage's bunch, I think they voted for it as well. I presume that the Tories either voted against or abstained or whatever. So it wasn't like there wasn't any support for that in the Commons, but of course nothing like what would be needed to get it through, given the Labour government's now huge majority. But 7 Labour MPs did vote in support of the SNP amendment. None of them were Scottish Labour MPs, so shame on them. And then they've then since had the whip taken away from them, haven't they? I think for 6 months.
Yes, and the explanation that we got was that Darwin removed the whip because they have to support the manifesto they were elected on, which, that's him getting tough, him and Rachel Reeves laying down the law. But it's a changed tune, because when they were at the by-election in Rutherglen, which, as you'll recall, Michael Shanks got elected as, and at that time, he was against the cap as well, despite having just voted to keep it this week. But Angela Rayner, who was up in Rutherglen, said Michael Shanks wouldn't face possible suspension from the party's Westminster group if he voted against the 2-child benefit cap. That's not how we work in the Labour Party. Well, actually, yes, it is. Now it is. That is how they work.
That didn't take long to change, did it?
No, but it just shows you what they'll say to get elected doesn't necessarily bear out what they do when they're elected. And I always remember being told by somebody, if what somebody says is different from what they do, believe what they do.
Yep.
We mentioned that PMQs, we no longer get the 2 questions, but Stephen Flynn did manage to get called for a question. So this is what he said on...
So this was just yesterday?
This was just yesterday, after the vote had taken place. This is the first time we've seen the reality of only having 9 SNP MPs. So he got a question at the end of it, but he didn't get his normal one, and
because Scotland didn't vote for him to get any questions. Scotland voted Labour and Lib Dems, and it's the Lib Dems who have now got the 2 questions because they're the third largest party.
Indeed.
And just 5 days before the general election in Scotland, on the front page of the Daily Record, Gordon Brown instructed voters to vote Labour to end child poverty. Yet last night, Labour MPs from Scotland were instructed to retain the two-child cap, which forces children into poverty. So, Prime Minister, what changed?
And then the other clip I've got is, I can't recall whether this was the same day or it might have been the day before, but this was Pete Wishart putting his tuppence worth.
This is from PMQs, yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has achieved something that we didn't think would be possible in such a short period of time. In less than 3 weeks, he has had a significant rebellion and he has suspended 7 of his members of Parliament, all for standing up for child poverty. This from a Labour government. The headlines are awful for the Prime Minister this morning. Poverty campaigners are furious with the Prime Minister. Is his honeymoon over?
And of course, the one person who is not anywhere to be seen now is Sarwar. In fact, I saw a hilarious little meme on Twitter today of a Rocky Mountain landscape with him sort of peering behind a rock because he's not said a word. The last clip, just to rub it in for Sarwar, this was a question that was asked of him before the election.
Isn't it true that once Keir Starmer's in power, you and all of the people here who are going to be elected to Westminster are going to end up doing whatever he says, regardless of what you think and what Scottish Labour members think?
Look, first of all, nonsense.
Nonsense. So, it'll be interesting to see how he explains that one away. Shameful, I think. You've got a new Labour MP. I've got a new Labour MP. I did have a look to see what my new MP is saying, and he's doubling down on SNP are playing games, I think he said. Well, with only 9 MPs, there's maybe not much more they can do but make token protests. But that was a good one. That has right within 18 days of the Parliament has shone a light on hypocrisy from the Labour Party. So I think
Rachel Reeves would probably say, well, we it would be dishonest of us, it would be disingenuous of us if we said we were going to do that now because, we don't know where the money would come from. Once we do know where the money would come from, of course, we'd be thinking about that. That's probably what you'd say. And actually, I am expecting them to do away with the two-child benefit cap. I think they will do it. But they're not going to. But obviously, they're being cautious about it. So we'll see. I mean, hopefully, I'm right. But we'll see.
And also, how many children are going to bed hungry while they make their mind up? That's the other thing. Well, anyway, that's okay. Today's hot topic.
Good. Hope you've enjoyed listening to that one, and we'll be back whenever we find another good hot topic.